the all-new Viltrox 50mm F1.8 Z lens. How does it perform on my Nikon Z7, and importantly, should you consider buying it? Let's test it and find out. What a day to be reviewing a lens. Guys, if you were watching my channel recently, I did a review of the Viltrox 35mm F1.8 Z lens. Now Viltrox again have been very kind to send me out their 50mm version. This is just newly released. So as again, like before, the Viltrox aren't paying me to do this video, so any sort of findings or opinions I've got of this lens are mine alone. As photographers, we all pretty much know by now that carrying around a 50mm prime lens in our camera bags has a lot of advantages. The Nifty 50, as it's commonly known, is one of the most popular prime lenses for its photographic versatility and compact lightweight. The Viltrox 50mm Z lens weighs in at 390 grams, has a 55mm filter thread, and, like the Viltrox 35mm lens I reviewed, has an external manual aperture ring for flexible creativity. But you can still control the aperture via the camera when you leave the ring in the auto position. The lens comes with front and rear lens caps, a lens pouch, and lens hood. The lens is built well and feels solid in the hand, and has a USB-C port inbuilt on the rear for future firmware updates. The first thing I was actually interested to learn about this Viltrox 50mm F1.8 Z lens is that it's actually near half the price here in Australia of its Nikon Z 50mm counterpart. Now, when you think about it, that's quite a substantial amount of money you save. But my first question was, okay, for that type of money, what type of lens do I get? I've decided to test this 50mm lens in a range of situations, from low light, portrait, video, and even a bit of landscape. From things that catch my eye to a trip to my local jetty. Okay, so I'm here with Christy and I'm just going to fire off a few portrait shots, so let's see how they turn out. For some low light tests, I headed into the city, and as luck would have it, there was this huge lightning storm approaching from the south. So I set up the Z7 with the Viltrox 50mm and managed to fire off a couple of good shots. I was pretty happy with this one shot, and if you push in, you can see this lightning strike that's just come down and hit behind the television transmission towers at Mount Cootha. So if I scroll up, you can see the definition in the lightning strike is very nice and sharp and clear. But the one thing that really did surprise me and that stood out is that up to the top left of frame, it actually picked up some stars. Now, when I pushed in, you couldn't really see any sort of color fringing or aberration around these stars. There is a slight trail on them, but that's nothing to do with the lens. It's more to do with the long exposure, because it was a 25-second exposure. And as we know, if you go past that 20-second mark when you're shooting astro, you start to get that slight trail on the stars. Very good. I'm very impressed with the lens in low light. No real noise to speak of in the corners, which I'm happy with. I thought it did a really good job. When it came to video, I found the Viltrox gave me really nice, sharp, clear images. And one thing that did capture my attention was the actual colors that the lens was giving me. There was just something about it, but it did really appeal to me. While I was capturing a few images of these fishermen pulling in some sea mullet with their nets, I noticed this seagull was looking for a bit of a quick meal. I just managed to capture this shot of this seagull taking flight. Now at the top of the image, you'll see that its wing is obscuring the fish in its beak. But when you look down to the shadow on the jetty itself, you can see this perfect outline of a fish in its beak. Just for dramatic effect, I turn this one black and white and give it a bit of a vignette on both sides. I've just popped back into the studio here, and one thing I've actually picked up while using the 50mm lens on the Z7 during video, and particularly in a quiet environment like this studio, is that the lens has a very slight whirring noise, and it's actually audible, or it can be picked up by the Z7's on-camera microphone. Now, it's not huge, and here's a little sample. Now, if you use radio mics like I do, this isn't really a big deal, but the noise is slightly there in playback, just something to keep in mind. If you're filming outside in a city or a park, you can't hear the focusing noise as it gets obscured amongst other external noises. Focusing between subjects in the foreground to the background is relatively quick, but not the fastest I've seen. I was just thinking, if you mount this lens onto something like the Nikon Z50 or the Nikon Z FC, you're going to get that 1.5 crop, which will turn this focal length into a 75mm focal length. Now, that may not be a bad thing, because I think that's a really nice head and shoulders type length for portraits. So this lens might be actually a nice budget alternative for those camera owners. So a little summation when it comes to this Viltrox 50mm F1.8 Z lens. Overall, I was actually impressed with this little lens. I found the images I got in stills and video were certainly good enough for me to consider buying it. I believe the more expensive Nikon Z 50mm version would probably deliver better operational performance and slightly sharper detail in images. But at the end of the day, you have to weigh up a couple of things. How much money you have to spend, and is the Nikon 50mm Z lens really worth paying twice the price for? I could recommend this Viltrox for things like street photography, portrait, low light, and as a general walk around lightweight lens. It'll give you decent shots in stills and video, and if you're willing to accept those couple of minor performance issues like I showed you, then for Nikon Z camera owners, this lens, especially for the price, should be worth at the very least a look. Well guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the review. If you need more information on this Viltrox lens, I've left a link in the description box below. As I always say, never stop creating, and I'll see you next time.